This morning we have with us Chris Fishburn, who has been working for GIL Support for almost 6 years. He handles tickets, Alma configuration, Primo customization, renormalization, and develops applications such as the GE blocking report and the institutional billing app. We also have Sean Boyle with us today. He has been working for GIL Support for a little over 3 years and is the manager of the GIL technical support team. In addition to supervising the day-to-day operations of GIL technical support, he also works on support tickets in Alma and Primo customizations, configuration, and projects. So thank you guys both for joining us today, and thank you to everyone who has joined for the presentation.
All right, thanks, Joy. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Chris and I, we sort of proposed this presentation way back in, I don't know, last year, I guess, when in-person GUGM was going to take place. And the idea of what we wanted to do as, I guess, sort of twofold. We'd been on Alma Primo, I guess, almost 5 years now, 4 or 5 years. And so we wanted to sort of show folks some of the stuff that happens behind the scenes and explain some of these processes. But then also this is sort of a result of us learning this process. Prior to us doing the renormalization process, that was a Bob Trotter job. And so as his retirement got closer and closer, he started teaching us his ways and the ways of doing all this. So it's sort of, I think, those were the two reasons we wanted to do this, and it is a good way to sort of flesh out what we've learned and then sort of pass along that information, so it's not so shrouded in mystery in some sense. What we're going to spend today talking about is really how information and the data, I mean, everybody knows that Alma and Primo are connected. We have nightly loads that are constantly pushing and pulling data out of Alma, and I'm talking specifically bib records and information like that, and getting it into Primo. And Primo displays it in a certain way that's different than Alma. And so we actually have a lot of control over that, and that's part of the process. We have control over what gets displayed, how it gets displayed, whether it's hyperlinked, what doesn't get displayed, things like that. And so that's what really the renorm process is about. And that's what we're going to talk about here. So Chris, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So one of the fascinating or interesting things, I think, is there's really sort of three different records. We've got two here. You've got the Alma MARC record, and it's your typical MARC record, and that's what resides in Alma, and that's where most of our cataloging takes place. We've got, for maybe lack of a better term, something that we call the Primo MARC record, at least Chris and I do, which you can sort of see here. It's kind of hard to capture it all. It's essentially a MARC record for the top portion. So here we've got a copy of a Stephen King novel. And so you see all the usual fields here, the 050, the 100, the 245, everything that is in your normal cataloging record. But as things get published from Alma, this record here on the left comes from the technical display. As they get published from Alma, you'll notice right down here at the bottom is a let's look to see if I had a little pencil icon. No, are a couple different fields like AVA, CAT, INST, and I think MMS. And so those are some extra fields that behind the scenes are getting added by norm rules. That information, like availability, is pulling out of the holdings record. So if you'll notice, there's There's a special collections location right there in subfield C on the AVA. The cat is a category. I think it's mainly used for journals. We actually didn't know what that was until we took a screenshot of this and discovered it's primarily used for journals. And then you'll notice some institutional information and MMSID gets added. And so that's sort of step 2 of the MARC record. That's part of the norm rules are creating those categories. But then in between these 2 records, these 2 screenshots here, there's a whole ton of other norm rules that convert this Primo MARC record into a P&X record. And the P&X is really where all the different stuff happens. And you have the ability to see the P&X record if any title in Primo. It's down at the very bottom. Yep, thank you, Chris. Down at the very bottom in the links section. And so the technical display will lead you to the Primo MARC record, whereas the show P&X will obviously lead you to the P&X. And so that, like I said, the P&X is where a lot of this normalization process happens. All right. So before we get to that, we want to just sort of take you from birth to, I don't want to say death, but just the beginning to the end of the process. And so really we like to say there really isn't one way that a change request gets submitted. Quite often, the change request comes from a committee. So you would have the OPAC committee or the cataloging committee, or we've had special collections make requests. I guess fulfillment probably has made requests. I don't know, but those are the common 3 ones. OPAC being the most common, and cataloging actually. But any of those committees will often bring us a change request, whether it's a new field be added, they need something hyperlinked, they want to remove something, they want to remove icons, whatever. So that's one way the process or the change requests come through. Second way is the enhancement request form. There's actually this at this URL. There's a request form that anybody can make a request on, and anything that's any requests that come through this request form are actually automatically added to our Trello board, and I'll talk about that in a sec. And then we have GIL as an organization. Sometimes we see issues and we would make that change request. And then sometimes I think individuals through the request form could make requests as well. So there's really a lot of different ways that folks can ask about making changes. And again, this is just a request. It has to go through a whole process to get to an actual change. So speaking of our Trello board, it's for those of you that have met with GIL thus far, we've probably shown you the Trello board, but Trello board's basically like a big bulletin board with cards on it. If you visualize like a bunch of index cards being thumbtacked to a big cork board. And essentially what that does is it allows us to organize all these different columns, and there's a link there and it's open to the public. All these different columns of OPAC or Primo change requests. Often we have new requests that come in. We have on that Trello board, we have all the different committees that are involved with Primo OPAC requests. And so there's review columns for all those. There's a GIL review column. So when a request comes in, it can start at any one of those locations. CAT team may have to look at it first to actually give GIL more information on how to stage it. GIL may need to look at it first to see if it's even possible. OPAC may need to look at it first. So there are a lot of moving pieces when a request first comes in. But once we sort of figure out who needs to look at it first, or once it actually comes to us, here's the beginning of our process. And when I say our, I say Chris and I, or GIL in general. We often, if they aren't given to us by the requester, we have to go find example records. And so if somebody says, hey, we'd like to suddenly show the 800 field when it has a second indicator to subfield B, but not a subfield T or something, you can get pretty complicated like that. And so sometimes we have those, sometimes somebody has an example that they saw and it was an issue or a problem, or it was missing something. They say, here's the MMSID for these examples. We usually like to gather a few more examples so we have sort of good pool of testing records, and that's where we often use indication rules. For those of you who have ever done that, you can create an indication rule in Alma and use it to filter sets. So we'll create a giant set of records in, say, one of the sandboxes, and we'll filter out and say we only want the records that have a 700 field with a second indicator 2 and a subfield B or whatever. And that helps us sort of narrow things down. And sometimes we don't find a whole lot. So that sort of leads to the fact, well, is this request, is it important to put the work in if there's not a lot of records that, you know, fit this criteria? So there's a lot of things going on there. But often we have to consult with the experts on what fields and subfields and indicators, because that's, you know, my limited cataloging abilities do require me to go to the catalogers a lot, or the OPAC folks. Just also not just the subfields, but really what they sort of envision, what they want, depending on the request. And then we have to establish conditions, like conditional rules. Are we going to exclude, include certain subfields? And then, like I said earlier, we consult with the catalogers, the OPAC team, other libraries, a whole slew of folks. So often it's a conversation that takes a little while.
All right, and Chris? Next, yep. And the next part is actually writing the norm rule, which is made up of 3 big things: the routine, the conditions that we want the PNX to show them under, and any transformations we want to make to that mark field itself. So the routines, all they do is they focus in on a particular mark field and their subfields. You can also do focusing on something from the previous PNX lines, any constant you want to add, most likely a string, or a configuration file, though we have never used the config before in the norm rule. And the part 2 would be the conditions. So we'll just go back to this real quick. This basically is under what conditions do we want that part of the mark record to show up. And as you can see, there's a lot of condition functionality that can be used for this. And part 3, any transformations we want to make to the string itself. Usually it can be something as simple as just copying the line as is. You can remove strings, you can replace characters, or something more complicated like getting the author first name or last name, which we're going to have an example of in a minute. And at the very end, the norm rule says what action needs to be taken, which you have 2 actions: add or merge. Add basically tells Primo to create a new line of the PNX record, and merge appends it to the end of that most recent line. So the order of the norm rules is very important for adding and merging each line. You can't just have the norm rules wherever. And as a bigger example, we have the full author with getting first name and last name. And we're using Harry Potter, everybody's favorite Harry, I guess. And as you can see in the mark record, the 100 field has the last name first and followed by the first name or initials, which is not really readable for people who want to find this in our Primo. So this is the norm rule that does that. So what this does is it focuses on the mark record field 100. It makes sure there's an indicator 1, and it includes the subfield A. So it's going to focus on that subfield A. That's what's going to end up in the PNX in some form. The condition, this is a wonderfully confusing one. This one wants to make sure that the Mark 100 field with an indicator 1 and a subfield 9 does not have string n. That's what this false means. But the fun part about that is it wants this entire condition, this false condition, to end up being true. It makes sense in a Boolean logic way, but not really from a readability. So one of the biggest challenges is to make sure that we can translate the conditions into something that makes logical sense, so we can figure out how that will work. Excuse me. And then after that, it replaces certain characters. In this example, it replaces any semicolons with a space. It gets name, removes characters from the end of that string like periods, commas, slashes, equals, and merges that line that has been created through everything above. And it has a semicolon delimiter, which you can have commas or basically any character. And that's just the first name. We also have to have a norm rule for the last name because we haven't added that yet. This one's basically the same. It makes sure that it looks at the Mark 100 field, does not have an N in the Mark 100 subfield 9, replaces any characters, gets the author's last name, and merges that after the first name. The next rule grabs all the other subfields that we want to include because we want the first name and last name first in that line. And the even less cataloger in me, I don't know what the B, C, D subfields do. But this does basically the same thing, takes all those subfields, puts them at the end of that line. And I believe the next rule in the long list of normals adds a new line because we're done with the author at that point.
All right, and then so yeah, once we build out these norm rules, and as you saw from the previous one, at times it can be 4 to 5 norm rules in a row just to create one line of P and X, or sometimes it could just be one norm rule. And that's sort of sometimes the challenge is to figure out the add and the merge and all the different conditions and the replacement of characters and things like that. A challenge, and sort of, I think Chris would probably agree, it's probably sometimes a lot of experimentation. But anyways, and I'll talk about that in just a sec. But after we create these norm rules, there's still a few other things that need to happen before you're ready to sort of see it in its final version in Primo and in the sandbox especially. There are over 175 different mapping tables. Now, we don't use them all. I'd say there's probably 10 that we use most. But these are things that, as I've shown here, a few examples of just like different formats that get mapped. Some of them are out of the box from Primo that they function in a very specific way, and you're not supposed to mess with them. They take codes that are in the PNX, and especially, and I'm speaking specifically to the resource type mapping tables. There are very specific codes that they use to show books being books, and audiovisual stuff being shown this and that. And so in one case, we were asked to take a look at trying to show microfilm as a as a format. And so after we created our norm rules to identify microfilm based on 008 positions and leader positions and things like that, we then had to go in and create a mapping table to say, and our norm rules also placed the word microfilm in the PNX. So then we had to go in and make a mapping table to help us display those things in Primo as sort of a last step to like take this value and show this here. So that's part of the process, and facet values. So anything that you find in the facets and et cetera. There's a ton and tons of mapping tables, but they basically let us take something that's potentially meaningless in the PNX, map it to a different value, and something that's meaningful and readable. And then on top of that, there's code tables. So you often do the mapping table as the next step, and then the code tables is sort of the final step. And there's about 100 of these, and these are what create the friendly labels that we see in Primo. And so we can actually take a value in a mapping table and then change it in a code table and make it something completely different. And so and that doesn't affect the process before it. The code table is often just the label that you see. And as I mentioned here, we've got everything from the basic advanced search indexes, display labels, a whole ton of stuff in there as well. So those are sort of, I'd guess, step 2 or 3 in this process. And then finally, the final step before things are seen is adjusting the views. So in Primo, we have, I always get this wrong, 25, 26 views. And that's basically every institution's specific look and feel of Primo. And this includes the archives as well. And so in the views, we can control everything that you see at the top of the main menu. You can control the brief display. So when you get your brief results, you can control what's in there. You can control full display, so everything that's in the full record, and that's probably where we spend the most time. And in fact, I think these two screenshots here are in fact the full display. And so if you notice on the screenshot up top, it's kind of hard to read, but there is like a relation field, and addition is part of. All of these, some of these come out of the box, but many of them have been added or removed by this renorm process, by suggestions by committees or whatever else, or we add things. And on the second screenshot down here below, it shows, if you notice, all these things called LDS. That stands for local display field. And I think we're given, like 100 local display fields, something like that. It could be a little off.
I believe it's 150-ish.
Okay, 150. So we've got a ton at our disposal. And so those are the things that we use often to some degree to add new fields. I'm trying to think of some of the ones we've done. Includes. So we just recently rolled out a local display field it matched with related titles, and then like if you had, I guess, a collection of poetry, the includes field would now pull out the individual titles of the poems. I could be getting this all wrong, and make them display them as a separate display field in a full display. But so when we create one of these display fields, you're often selecting it here and creating it, and you're not truly creating it, but you're creating it for the view. And then if you go back up to this top screenshot here, you notice all these arrows on the very, very right, the up and down arrows. We actually have to put the display field in there. And in Primo Back Office is like insane clunkiness. You have to click this up arrow 80 billion times to get that new display field wherever you want it. And it's actually a really mind-numbing process. So this part of the process in particular, for 26 institutions, when a new field is added to the full display, it's quite a process. I do wish Primo Back Office is not the most user-friendly interface at times. And the display field's definitely one of those. And then also in the views, I was just going to say the scopes are controlled. So for those of you that have individual scopes set up, I think Georgia Southern is probably a good example, who have like a a couple different scopes for maybe films or stuff that's in certain collections, or obviously certain libraries. If you wanted to scope there, you can create scopes for that that only search that particular. USG scope is its own scope that everybody has. So that's another part of the sandbox view. All right. Is it still me? Yeah. Okay. So once we do that, we've talked to the committees, or we've got the request. We talk to the committees. We get our examples. We write the norm rules. We mess with any mapping tables, code tables we need to. We adjust the views. Even before we adjust the views, probably this happens right here. So there's, unfortunately, the way to test whether your norm rules are working properly in the sandbox, really either Primo environment, production and sandbox, is this sort of really ridiculously cumbersome harvesting process. So let's imagine this. So this top screenshot here shows a set that we have that's like a 490, 830 test set. So we were trying to move the 490 to a certain display field when an 830 was present, and have one hyperlinked and one not. And so we created a test set with a few examples in there. And so Primo Sandbox does not automatically publish. Alma Sandbox does not automatically publish regular cycle like the production environment does. So in order to make it publish, you have to run a series of jobs. So on the screen down, the second screenshot here, if you want to push files to Primo from the Alma Sandbox, you've got to run this job that's called mark records to be republished by the NZ job. And so actually, I should say this is not specific just to testing norm rules. If you all are doing any work in the sandboxes, which you all totally can, and you create something new in Alma, a new record or something, it's not automatically going to get published to Primo. So you would sometimes have to run this job as well, or reach out to us. I've had a couple of people reach out to us to push some records through so they can test whatever they're doing. But once you run this job, you then go to the network zone Alma sandbox, and you kickstart what would normally be a scheduled job, but scheduled jobs are disabled in the sandboxes. And so you would go to this scheduled job called network publishing job. And so remember, this is just for us to test a couple of records against a new norm rule. And so you would run this job, and once it's done running, you would go into the Primo Back Office, and you have all these different pipes in the back office. It's just pipes of data. And if you notice here, we've got pipes for Georgia Archives. They've got their own pipe. Georgia Tech, University System of Georgia, Piedmont, which we don't really mess with much anymore. But each of these pipes have their set of norm rules. They're mostly identical because we try to make changes to USG. We make changes to Georgia Archives if they want the same norm rules. And Georgia Tech is, I think they copied our norm rules about a year ago, so they're pretty close on theirs as well. But anyways, once you've run the IZ job and the NZ job, you would then kick off this particular pipe to grab the records that the NZ job published. And then this particular job right here is the one that's actually taking your records, applying norm rules to it, and rebuilding the PNX based on those new norm rules. So whatever changes we made or additions we made to the norm rules, the PNX of those like 3 records that you published would be altered, and you could see the results of it. I don't know if we gave an example screenshot, but no. So in the case of Chris's last name, first name, if we were making a change to the author setup, and this was a case where we actually did this, I guess, maybe last year, where we added subfield E to the display of authors' names and contributors and creators, but we did not want that E to be searchable. So when you clicked on Stephen King, and in brackets it would say author, you didn't want the author to go across with it, or editor, or whatever else. And so we had to run this job multiple times trying to figure out how to get that E out of there. And so you make a little tweak to your norm rule, you save your norm rule, you deploy your norm rules, then you go back to the IZ, you publish those records, you go to the NZ, you publish those records, you go to the pipe, you gather the records, and then you see what happened based on your norm rules.
It's really very similar to software development.
Yeah, it is. Although it would be nice, we've often wondered why there's no ability to automatically click a button in the back office with your current norm rules or whatever and see how it immediately would affect a record. It would be ideal, but I think, and this is just me thinking out loud, Primo VE basically has the back office sort of built into it. Primo VE is Ex Libris's new Primo interface, and what it does is it takes a lot of these norm rules and these processes and sticks them somehow in between Alma and Primo more directly, so you can actually make changes to norm rules in Primo VE and see the immediate results. I've heard it's not without its problems, but we're sort of on an older platform of sorts. So for what that's worth. All right, and so once we get that all staged and all done, then we go back to the committees. And sometimes this can be a really easy fix. We've had rules or requests that came through and we knocked them out within one cycle, one renorm cycle. We've had other things like the includes and related fields that just came out that took 7 to 8 months. And it's really just how complicated they are, or how much digging we got to do and things like that. So anyways, we go back to the committees and we present the examples. It usually goes through 2 or 3 committees again, cataloging, OPAC, the main ones at times. And then we get any additional information from them just to make any changes. If they see any issues, often we have them dig around and really look around for any issues. Sometimes we actually run a renorm on the sandboxes that apply these rules to the entire environment, and so we have suddenly these rules applied all across the board, and that sometimes brings out some glaring examples or issues that we didn't intend. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out where we are. Is this still me, Chris, or were you going to start up again? I might have taken over. Well, I'll keep going. But then final approval is done by the OPAC committee.
Crap, I was muted. Sorry, I was muted.
Oh, was this you?
Yeah, this was me.
Okay, all right. Sorry.
All right.
I'll be quiet now.
That's fine. So after that, we have the final approval by the OPAC committee. It's done either via an email vote or at the next OPAC meeting. Once we have the go-ahead, we copy all the rules from the sandbox to the production back office, including any changes to the mapping, code tables, scopes, and anything like that. And then we schedule the big renorm pipe for the last Friday of the month, though sometimes that falls in the first couple of days of the next month. That's just how months work. And the renorm pipe also runs the indexing, hot swapping, dedupe, and the Ferber processes. So it's a big job. It can take the entire weekend or more, depending on how quick things are running. And then Monday, after that, assuming everything is finished, we do that wonderful process where we add the new fields to each individual institution's view. We've gone over the monotony of that already. And that's how a renorm is done. That's how things show up in Primo.
So does anybody have any questions or thoughts?
Hold on, let me turn on, allow everyone to be able to unmute themselves. All right, everyone should be able to unmute themselves if they have any questions, or you can type them into the chat. Let's see if there are any comments so far. No questions so far. Lee has a question. Okay, you can unmute yourself if you want.
Hi, Sean. I have a question. I heard from you presentation. You talk about if we either add a new record or change some record in Alma sandbox in order to be shown in Primo sandbox. There's a job need to run. So I wonder. Who is going to run? Is like the library, or is like a GIL site? And yeah, and how we run, how like a procedure, because we have a problem. We have a create a record. It's not shown in Primo sandbox. We create it in Alma sandbox.
Yeah. So, yeah. I know that's sort of come up, especially since we've gotten more sandboxes, and I think people are experimenting more. So my answer about a procedure is I've just sort of thought about it in the last day or two that we probably should come up with some instructions on how to do that. The only so the screenshots that I showed earlier about the IZ job where you harvest the record, and the NZ job where you publish the record to Primo, and then you have that final job where you run the pipe. Folks can do, yeah, it's a few screens back. Folks can run this first job here in their own, and I say there, I mean in these sandboxes. The sandboxes are sort of owner neutral. They don't belong to any institution. It just happens to have institutional data in there. So folks can run this part. I would sort of say GIL staff would probably at a minimum they have to run the back office job, but maybe the NZ job would be. So in other words, I don't have a really great question. I think you would probably just need to reach out to us for the moment, and probably Chris and I should probably chat about that a little bit to figure out a procedure or process that makes it easiest for everyone involved. When changes are made, we all need to see the results of those changes to records in Primo, especially. So
Okay.
let us think about it a little bit.
Okay, great. Yeah.
But for now, I would say for now, just reach out to us, and we'd be willing to run these jobs for you and troubleshoot any of the reasons that it may not be showing up in Primo, because it can be a little picky about item records displaying, depending on work orders and things like that, no barcode present, things like that, or suppressed from discovery, or all these different reasons. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I see that Betsy Fleming made a comment. I'll read it. She's the chair of the OPAC committee, so they're always happy to take requests. You can use the form in the presentation, or you can email, and the email address is there in the chat. Does anyone else have any questions? You're welcome to unmute yourself. We technically have a few more minutes, almost 15 left, if you all wanted to chat about some things. Okay. Okay, well, seeing none and hearing none, I think we can go ahead and conclude the presentation. I believe everyone knows how to reach you guys, right? Chris and Sean?
They should, yes.
Okay. Okay. And so if you do have any follow-up questions, just get in touch with them. This presentation, as I mentioned before, will be available, and then you can, go through it a little bit more closely if you'd like. And the recording will also be available if you want to review it again. But I want to thank Chris and Sean for joining us this morning to give this presentation. And I want to thank you all for joining us. And hopefully you guys have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.